Not sure if this is working. Oh, there it is.
Hi, welcome.
Oh, hi. I'm sorry. It's been a while since I've used this. I'm using this on my phone, so
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I know
but that is a little
it's
weird.
trickier on the phone. Yeah. Well, welcome.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get started in just a minute. We're just letting a few more people in.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you.
Allison, whenever you're ready.
Okay. I think we're good to go. All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Thursday tour of the collection. We're so excited for you to be here and take you through the museum virtually because we can't do it in person right now. A couple of guidelines before we begin that I want to go over. Since if you're in our Zoom room, we just ask that you keep yourself muted during our tour so that everyone can hear our wonderful docent. If you have any questions, we ask that you put them in the chat. So that's that speech bubble at the bottom of your screen and it says chat. You can click that and you can go ahead and write any questions or comments, and then we'll save them all to the end and we'll do a big Q&A session at the end with our docent. If you're watching on Facebook, welcome. Maybe you joined through our Facebook event or our Facebook page. You can also get in on the conversation and you can put your questions or comments in the comments of the Facebook video. So we'll be monitoring that and we can get to your questions at the end as well. So with that, I want to turn it over to our docent who will be giving our tour today. Our tour will be led by Lucia, who has been a docent with us for about 11 years, but she has never done a virtual tour. So this is her first virtual tour. So we're very excited to have her with us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lucia for our tour today.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Lucia Tilton. Welcome to our daily Thursday virtual tour. And again, like what she mentioned, this is my first virtual tour, so I hope to walk gently and not stumble as much as I go through this. And I also hope that after the tour, what I hope to achieve is that you see the art pieces as representations and productions of their time, how human creativity has progressed through the ages, and also to get you interested in art. Now, what art am I talking about? I'm actually talking about the highlights of the Timken Museum collection. But before we go into that, I wanted to give you a brief history behind the Timken Museum. We owe the existence of the museum and its beautiful collection to two families who incidentally both had Henrys with entrepreneurial spirit in their names, plus one very dedicated lawyer. Our first Henry is Mr. Henry Putnam. He was the uncle to the sisters Anne and Amy and Irene Putnam, and the older brother to their father, Albert. Henry Putnam was an entrepreneur, very, very hardworking. He was one of the first businessmen to start selling bottled water, if you can believe that, along with his other business ventures. He had an only son called Willie, who also tripled his fortune substantially. Unfortunately, Willie passed away and he left a total of $5 million to his sister or to his cousins and Amy and Irene. Now, $5 million is a lot of money today. So imagine how much it was back then, you know. So the three sisters, Amy, Anne, and Irene, from your right to your left, I believe, they were serious scholars with an extensive education in Latin, German, Romance languages, philosophy, and history. And they were definitely book nerds as well. They had over 8,000 volumes in their library. Unfortunately, Irene also passed away within years of Willie, which meant that all that money of $5 million were left to the two sisters, Amy and Anne Putnam. And so with the fortune at their disposal, these sisters devoted the rest of their lives to collecting masterpieces of art. You can almost say that these artworks that I'm going to show you are their babies. And almost all of them, which is about 40 to 60 works, are now known as the Putnam Collection. Now, where does the second Henry come in? The second Henry is Henry Timken. He was also an entrepreneur. He was a German immigrant. He moved to the States with his family when he was around 7 or 8. He is known for revolutionizing the carriage transportation with his invention of the tapered roller bearing, also becoming extremely wealthy in the process. And his family used to spend their winters in in San Diego. I don't know where Chicago came from. Who wants to winter in Chicago? Anyway, So they were wintering in San Diego. And one of his daughters, Amelia, actually settled here and married locally Mr. Appleton Bridges. So the Bridges actually underwent the construction of the San Diego Fine Arts Gallery, which is now known as the San Diego Arts Museum. So a lovely little fact there. The Bridges, along with the Putnam sisters, were very big and strong supporters of the San Diego Fine Arts Gallery and San Diego art scene in general. Now, how did these two families come together? We owe that to Walter Ames. I could not find a picture of him on the internet for some reason, but there is a bust of him in the museum. And this was during one of our Christmases where we put a hat on his bust. And so this is a likeness of Mr. Walter Ames. He was a lawyer to both families, and he was the linchpin in bringing them together. How so? So he was the lawyer to the Putnam sisters, and he helped establish the nonprofit Putnam Foundation, which is the beneficiary of the sisters' estates and which continues to endow the museum to the present day. It's because of this endowment that the Putnam collection and the Timken Museum are always free to the public. And so Walter Ames knew just how much and how magnificent the sisters' collection was, because they were all over the place, all over the US. He wanted to bring all of them back under one roof. And so he had another client, Mr. Henry Timken Jr., and he consulted with him, and fortunately, Henry agreed through the Timken Foundation to pay a substantial amount to build a new art gallery in Balboa Park. And that's why it's called the Timken Museum, but the Putnam Collection. Now, the museum started construction in 1951. It was designed by a local architect, John Mock, for Frank Hope and Associates, and it opened in 1965. As you can see, it's a beautiful example of mid-century modernism. It's made of imported Italian travertine marble, glass, and bronze, and it sits to one side of the big plaza in Balboa Park, probably to the right of the San Diego Fine Arts Museum if you're facing the San Diego Arts Museum. It is definitely in direct contrast to the surrounding Spanish Baroque and Mediterranean architecture. Now imagine all of us walking up the stairs into the foyer, and we enter the museum. Now you're gonna have to imagine this because it's all virtual. So we are now in the rotunda. And if you look to the right, there's the Italian gallery, the Russian icon gallery, and then the exhibitions gallery. And if you look to your left, there's the French gallery, the Dutch Flemish gallery, and the American gallery. We will all be visiting each room as I go through the tour. Now, but let's stay in the rotunda for now. And how so? On the rotunda, we actually have 4 beautiful tapestries. They're French that hang on the walls. And a lot of people miss this because they usually go straight to the galleries on either side. But when we do reopen either this year or next year, please do make sure to take a look at these tapestries because they are beautiful. They're floor lengths from ceiling to the floor. And they're tapestries. They're a form of textile art. They're typically woven by hand on the loom. And they were once very, very valuable, and they're still valuable, very expensive, because it took a while for them to be created. Definitely a lot longer than paintings for sure. And they were also very functional decor in palaces and castles. Now here is an example of how tapestries are actually hung. So you have like an actual 3D rendering instead of pictures flat on the screen. And if you look on either side of the room, there are tapestries hanging there. They're essentially rugs on the wall, to be basic like that. But the thick fabric helped warm often chilly interiors of those big castle rooms and big palace interiors. And then they had beautifully colored stories that provided visual entertainment. These tapestries were also made from precious materials, including silk, silver, and gold thread. Our French tapestries are made from, I believe, silk and silver thread. And if you do have the chance to see them live or in person, Sometimes you can see some of the silver threads coming out. And the story goes that during the French Revolution, when all the peasants stormed the palaces and castles and grand houses and chateaus, they would pull down the tapestries from the walls and burn them. Because why? When you pick through the ashes, apparently you would get silver and gold nuggets. I'm not sure if the story is true, but stories do come from somewhere. But back to our French tapestries. These tapestries are called the stories of Queen Artemisia, made around the 15th century, 1562 to 1565. They were originally part of a series of 20 separate scenes, so that's 20 tapestries. They were designed by Antoine Caron and woven by the Flemish artisans in the Faubourg Saint-Marcel workshop of Marc de Commans and François de la Planche. I do not have a French accent, so it comes out a bit wonky. If you look at the close-up of the tapestry, you can see in the far right corner F&M, that stands for Faubourg Saint-Marcel Workshop. And then if you look down on the bottom, you see the P, which stands for the de la Planche. And then below the F&M, again to your right, there's a flower which indicates that this was created by a Flemish workshop. Now, if you also look towards the middle, you see an A and an M. It's not very clear, so let me just point at it in this area. So you see the A and the M. And again, I refer back to the title, Stories of Queen Artemisia. Now, Queen Artemisia was the story of a young queen who had to take up the reins of ruling because of the sudden death of her husband, King Milesius. That's where the A and the M comes from. Now, these stories became very popular in the 16th century because they were understood to refer to then reigning French Queen Catherine de Medici, who had an important role in the reigns of her three sons, King Francis II, King Charles X, and King Henry III. Unfortunately, they weren't really healthy in the best of health. And so as they passed away, she always ended up taking the reins until the next king came into power. But yeah, so these stories alluded to her and how she kept things in place during this time of France's reign. These particular tapestries were partly ordered by the Italian-born Duke of Savoy, Charles Emmanuel. And I say that because if you look at the center of the tapestry, you can actually see the ducal seal right there. And these pieces were commissioned to commemorate the wedding of his son, Victor Amadeus, to the daughter of Henry IV and Marie de Medici, who is apparently first cousin to the queen herself. Now let's actually talk about the tapestries themselves. The stories in our tapestries come with the requests of citizens and petitions. So we have two stories for each of the four tapestries. The first one is the request of citizens and petitions. And here we see the benevolence of the queen as she takes into account the concerns of her subjects from all ranks of life. A little close up there, there's the queen right here. Let me bring up the laser pointer if I can. Here's the queen right here, and these are the citizens, and they're giving her their requests. There's actually her son as well. She's probably showing him and teaching him how to do it as well when come time for him to take over the reins of power. Now, the second set of tapestries is called Distributing the Booty, and I kid you not, that is the actual title, Distributing the Booty, and a group of soldiers. And this shows the queen sharing the spoils of conquests equally. Now, if you can do a quick close-up of the first tapestry, we see the queen over here. She is actually dressed in general armor, and she's handing it to her soldiers. If you look in back, we even see Amazon wires, which probably denotes the strength of women as warriors, like, oh, you know, Wonder Woman. And then if you look at the very far background, we actually see a park, which some historians would say is actually Paris. Now, the glass tapestry is the continuing line of soldiers, and they're dressed in Roman armor because back then the Roman legions were known to be very strong. They were legendary in their strength. And so by dressing these legions in Roman armor, you are alluding to the strength of course, the queen herself. We also see palm trees here, which may indicate that the conquests were from far-flung regions and that the kingdom was actually larger than they supposed. Now, let's go back to the rotunda. We've taken our fill of the rotunda, and I want to take everyone over to the Russian icon gallery, which is over here. This room showcases Russian icons. It was also known as the Amy Putnam Gallery, as Russian icons were particular favorites of Amy's. She had a huge interest in Russian history and all things Russian, and even attended Stanford University as a graduate student to pursue this interest, paying the wonderful amount of $25 a semester. Wow. She actually collected over 300 Russian icons. And this next piece that I'm going to talk about actually hung over the fireplace in her library. Now, what do you see before you? You see a mother and a son, and it is definitely a mother. It's the Georgian mother of God. We have Mary holding Jesus on her hand. And this whole scene is actually called the Hoditria, meaning she who shows the way. It's a very common and very common and very ritual icon subject of the Theotokos. Theotokos, which also means God bearer or the Virgin Mary. So here we see Mary holding the child Jesus at her side. Her head is inclined towards him, indicating, his head inclines toward him, and her hand points to him as well, indicating that Jesus is the savior of all mankind. Baby Jesus, here we go. Baby Jesus is shown handing her a sheaf of wheat with his right hand, and it symbolizes and foretells his body as a source of immortality and resurrection. And then on his left hand, he's holding a scroll, which represents the word of God. Mary's head is covered with a veil. It's colored red. Hopefully you can see the red come through. The red is meant to represent her suffering and accent to holiness. Her dress is in blue, and again, I'm hoping you can see the blue, but it's not very, very clear at this point, but it is blue. And the blue represents Mary's purity as well as her heavenly nature. Now, on her veil as well, there are 3 stars. You can barely see the third golden star, so I didn't focus on it. But these 3 golden stars, also known as Stella Maris, symbolize her virginity before, during, and after Christ's birth. So definitely a miracle to remain a virgin through all of that. There's a small banner that hangs around above Jesus' head, which is Greek for Jesus Christ. And we have 2 stylized letters on either side of Mary's head, also in Greek, which means Maria, Mother of God. Now, the gold background is made of gold leaf, which symbolizes the divine nature and brilliant eternal light that is heaven and God himself. And they always use gold because gold denoted brilliance. It denoted that there was no night whatsoever in heaven or in God himself. And for lesser paid icons, or if your budget was lower, they would use yellow paint. But most of the time, they always try to use gold and gold leaf. This whole piece is actually egg tempera on a flat wooden panel. Egg tempera is a permanent, fast-drying paint medium, which composed of colored pigments, like here's the color here, and it is mixed with a binder medium, usually egg yolk. So this would be painted with an egg yolk, and they would be painted directly on a prepared flat wooden panel. And it was a pretty good method, although it dried pretty fast. but it lasted very long. Like the quality of the paintings on egg tempera lasted very well, and we even have examples from the 1st century AD. Now, each element in the creation of this piece was deliberate. Now, why would that be? Russian iconography, or Eastern Orthodox iconography, is actually a theological art. It was part and parcel of the Eastern Orthodox religious culture. And for those not very schooled in religion, Eastern Orthodoxy is the sister of Roman Catholicism. So back to the icon. Icons were considered sacred, and they hung in churches or were used as private pieces of worship. The creation of icons itself was very strict, and it had to adhere to a canon, which is a very heavy Byzantine style with small revisions from Russian schools. There was an icon painter's guide. These were books with detailed descriptions of every saint and every subject that you were allowed to paint. And certain subjects were painted over and over again, such as this scene called the Hoditria. The figures were drawn in the same flat and angular style with almond-shaped eyes, closed lips to convey otherworldliness. And let's focus on the word otherworldliness. We were not supposed to draw them as humans. They were supposed to be otherworldly beings, because these were windows into the sacred world. And then if you look at the colors themselves, all colors used, you had to be the same. And then even the process of icon making was the same. Egg tempera on flat, specially prepared wooden panels. Now, some icons had special coverings called risas or oplads. And here's an example of that. These beautiful creations themselves, also quite valuable. They were typically made from gold, silver, or precious stones. And they would cover the entire icon except for the head, hands, and the feet. Now, these coverings ensured the divine protection of the icon until it was time to be brought up for worship. More practically, it was protection against things such as candle soot, oil from human hands. And so it was both the decorative and the functional element, and it was also part and parcel of some icons. You knew that an icon was especially valuable if it had an additional risa or oplad attached to it. We do know that our piece has an oplad because of the pinpricks that you can see. I don't know if you can see them. Hopefully when we reopen, you can come in and take a closer look. We unfortunately do not know where the risa or the oplad is for this piece, because when this piece was acquired, it was acquired without the covering. Now, I mentioned that the icon is the windows to the sacred world. They were considered otherworldly and divine because, again, there were objects of worship, and they just happened to be beautiful. Iconographers were known to fall into trances before painting, so they could be spiritually inspired. And of course, you do not see the name of the creator because it's all part of a school called the Moscow School. This was all in creation of the icon, and not for the glory of the religion, not for the glory of the artists themselves. Now, how the hell, excuse my language. So how did Russian iconography end up from Byzantine in Eastern Orthodox faith all the way to Russia? This is because it was imported to Russia from Constantinople via the adoption of the religion by a Princess Olga of Kiev, who was the first recorded female ruler of Russia and the first to adopt Christianity. So that is how we have Russian iconography within an Eastern Orthodox faith that originated in Constantinople. All right. So let's get back to the Timken map to go to our next place in the map right here. We have the Russian icon gallery. Let's go into the Italian gallery, and let's take a look at the Madonna and Child with Saint Elizabeth, the infant Saint John the Baptist, and Saint Catherine. Now, if you were thinking the title was pretty long for this piece, you are right. It is pretty long, but it's pretty straightforward. It is an oil painting on canvas, which differs from the Russian icon in what way? And I will answer that question because no one can answer me back. If you guess the type of paint as well as the type of region, you are correct. The Russian icon or icons in general are created using egg tempera on a wooden panel, while this and all other pieces during the Renaissance period were oiled on canvas. Now, let's focus on the piece itself. We have here Mary in the center with the baby Jesus, a very nice and plump baby, as all babies should be. We have St. Elizabeth wrapping swaddling clothes with the infant St. John the Baptist. And then we have Catherine. I gave that away too prematurely. We have a beautifully dressed figure in dressing what was most currently fashion back then. And she's kneeling in front of baby Jesus. If you look on her right hand, she's holding palm leaves. And this is a symbol of goodness and victory. And then what she's kneeling on is sort of a wheel. And this is where we believe that she's St. Catherine, as St. Catherine is known to have been martyred by execution on the wheel. I don't know what that looks like, and I don't want to think about it. But most martyrs died really bad deaths. But anyway, this is how St. Catherine is identified, usually with the wheel, whether she's kneeling on or it's around her. Really depends on the artist. The whole tableau is called the Sacred Conversation. This is where the artist places important religious figures side by side with local saints to give the saints importance. So in this particular painting, the important religious figures are Mary, Jesus, St. Elizabeth, John the Baptist, and they're placed side by side with St. Catherine, denoting her importance. If you notice, baby Jesus is not looking at Mary, he's actually looking at St. Catherine, basically denoting her importance as a saint. Now, artists use symbols and colors as visual cues for the audience to identify figures in the painting. Can you think of a few based on what we've seen so far? And I think I've mentioned a few. And if you think, oh yeah, the wheel for St. Catherine, you're correct. Again, there's animal clothing for St. John the Baptist. He is always shown wearing animal clothing. The red, white, and blue colors for Mary. Again, the red is for a passion and sacrifice. The blue is for purity. And the white is for either heaven or her virginity. And then St. Elizabeth, we don't really have any designations for her other than she's usually shown with St. John the Baptist. So these are wonderful artist cues to help you identify figures in a painting when you hopefully go into a museum in the future. Now, this painting is a wonderful example of the Venetian school, and its creator, Paolo Veronese, was known as one of the three great painters from the Venetian school. He was extremely talented in the use of color and the art of storytelling in all of his paintings. And if we go back really quickly to this painting, there's already a story going on there. So he was very good at storytelling in his paintings, and he had a very excellent visual style, very beautiful elegance, all this shimmering colors that lent to the magnificence of his paintings. He was particularly known for creating large historical paintings with themes from religion and mythology. Now, the Venetian school developed in the Renaissance of Venice in the 1400s. It was also called the Venetian Renaissance, as they shared the same humanist values, the use of linear perspective and natural figurative treatments of the Renaissance art in Florence and Rome. Now, the difference between the Venetian school versus the Florentine Renaissance was that the Venetian school focused on coloring or using color to create forms. So they painted color directly on the canvas. Whereas the Florentine Renaissance, they emphasized drawing or disegno, basically drawing the forms on before adding the color in. And this style of Venetian school ended up resulting in works of revolutionary movement. If you look at this painting again, there's a lot of flow, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of richness of color and depth. Again, I refer to the shimmering of the fabric and lots of distinct psychological expression. Now, our piece is actually atypical of Paolo Veronese, as I mentioned earlier. He actually has larger scale work, such as the Wedding of Cana. This piece was almost 22 feet tall and 33 feet wide. And I actually added a silhouette of a human. This human is about 6 feet. So you can tell just how tall it is, or how not tall he is versus the painting. And if you have the chance to see this piece if you ever visit the Louvre. So if you visit the Louvre, go to where the Mona Lisa is, look at the Mona Lisa, turn around, and you will see this beautiful, huge masterpiece by Paolo Veronese. All right, so when I referred to the Renaissance a little bit when I talked about Veronese, and I would like us to now head over across the way into the Dutch and Flemish Gallery to talk about the Dutch and Flemish Renaissance, which was exemplified by our next artist and this next piece. This is called The Parable of the Sower. It's oil and wood panel. And I'm hoping at this time you're starting to see a theme in painting subjects in this point of the tour. If yes, then great. Double points if you say the themes are religious. Why a prevalence of religious themes? Two things. Firstly, the Roman Catholic Church was a prominent benefactor of artists, so religious subjects were often and encouraged. Secondly, artists created what they thought the market, what the client wanted. Smart thinking there, which was, as you guessed it, religious art. And the Parable of the Sower is one such religious theme, and it recounts how Jesus compares himself as a sower and the word of God as his seeds. So here we see the sower in the bottom part of the painting with his seeds, he's spreading the seeds around. And part of the parable talks about how some of the seeds land on fertile soil and the word takes root. Some of the seeds land on semi-fertile soil and the word is taken but not understood or absorbed completely. Some seeds land on barren ground, they get eaten by birds or fade away. This painting itself is a beautiful world landscape typical of Bruegel, where it stretches out from the sower all the way to the mountains in the distance. So it's from this beautiful frontal perspective and stretching all the way out to these mountains. And it lands in the air of a great height, of heightened perspective, while also adding intimate moments in the narrative. And this is where Bruegel was brilliant at. He had the grand scheme of things, but then he also had intimate moments. And what are these moments? We have moments of the sower of the parable and his side of the river. But then if you look across the river, we actually have a faint outline of Jesus preaching the exact same parable. So just a beautiful combination of narrative along with technique and the scene itself. The Parable of the Sower is, again, as I mentioned earlier, is a wonderful example of the Dutch and Flemish Renaissance, which was the region's artistic answer to Italian Renaissance and a natural product of the Dutch Golden Age. The Dutch Golden Age was a period of great wealth and economic power in the Netherlands due to lucrative shipping and trading routes. What the Dutch and Flemish contributed to the Renaissance was elevated landscape that I talked about just now, still life, and genre painting, while also improving on existing portraiture techniques. Pieter Bruegel the Elder was one of the leading and influential artists of this movement. And he actually painted other subject matter besides religious themes. He actually started painting everyday peasant life, which is a very rare subject matter for paintings back then. He actually passed away relatively young, and so did not leave behind a large body of work. And so our Parable of the Sower is one of about 40 surviving pieces that are known to be created by Pieter Bruegel all over the world. That's 40 pieces in the entire world. And we have Amy Putnam to thank for actively purchasing this piece against the advice of her art consultant. He actually told her not to buy it. So we are glad she bought it because we are now owners of a Bruegel, which is one, again, of 40 pieces in the entire world. I can't move to the French gallery at this time without talking about our other important piece in the Dutch Flemish gallery, which is our Rembrandt. Our Rembrandt is Saint Bartholomew, who was one of the 12 apostles of Jesus Christ. This is oil on canvas, and he is painted as a quietly brooding figure. The use of chiaroscuro or light and dark was typical of Rembrandt, and it highlights the arched brow, the creased face, and the rest of his form in alternating dark hues of brown and darker brown. And true to Rembrandt, he painted every single wrinkle and every single fold, and that's probably why he was very good at depicting humanity. He is seated. When I say he, I mean Saint Bartholomew. He is seated, but not very comfortably so. If you kind of look in the back, it almost looks like he's putting his arms against the back of the chair, and it's almost sitting at the edge of the chair. Maybe he's contemplating his impending martyrdom. And his martyrdom is represented by a knife in his left hand, which was the knife that skinned him alive. So pretty tough to be a saint, because you, again, they refer back earlier, you don't really die a good death. An interesting fact about this knife, it was actually previously painted over with a book due to a former owner's objection of the knife. This Rembrandt, called Saint Bartholomew again, is one of 14 existing Rembrandt paintings in Southern California. I guess the collectors in Southern California weren't as quick as obtaining Rembrandts, but we do have one of the 14 existing ones in Southern California. The style is actually considered Baroque. Baroque, for the audience purposes, is the art reaction to Renaissance. It was highly ornate, very extravagant, and it flourished in Europe from the early 17th to the late 18th century. Now, where a Renaissance painting was captured perfect form, and it's actually compared to the storm. So a Renaissance painting captured the pause before the storm. Baroque was the storm. Now, Baroque painters believed that humans in life should be portrayed as we really are, wrinkles and all, not as how perfect we could be. Now, and Baroque appeals to the emotions of the viewer and tends to be very dramatic, a very sense of drama. Rembrandt's work can technically be considered Baroque, as it follows the same definition of drama. There's definitely a lot of brooding drama going on in this painting, and a lot of emotions. Now, Rembrandt is generally considered to be one of the greatest visual artists in the history of art, very important in Dutch art history, most particularly during the Dutch Golden Age. But unlike the Dutch masters of his generation, he actually had a wide range of style and subject matter. He did portraits, self-portraits, lots of self-portraits definitely, landscape, the genre scenes, allegorical and historical scenes, religious themes, and mythological scenes. The interesting fact is that Rembrandt actually never traveled. He never went to Italy to study like other artists, but he was definitely influenced by the work of Italian masters who had studied, of course, in Italy, and other Netherlandish artists who actually went to Italy, like Pietro Lassmann and, of course, Peter Paul Rubens. Rembrandt was born in Leiden. At age 14, he was enrolled in the University of Leiden, but discovered that he was more inclined to be an artist. He moved to Amsterdam in 1631, where he lived for the rest of his life, had huge success as a painter, but he lived beyond his means, made bad investments, collected a lot of items. He was actually kind of known as a hoarder at one time. He did have a wealthy wife, but she passed away unexpectedly. And so combine all of that, had him in financial distress for the rest of his life. Nevertheless, Rembrandt continued to paint, and our piece, Saint Bartholomew, is actually from that period of his life. So, as an artist, he still continued to do what he loved despite of, and perhaps imbued that sense of brooding and maybe sadness in Saint Bartholomew. Now let's take a step back from the high drama of the Baroque, from religious subject matter, and into more lighter stuff, like the frothy lightness of the distinctive French art of Rococo. Now what we have here is called Lovers in the Park, and it's actually the largest painting in the Timken. Not as large as one of Veronese's paintings, but it's definitely large. It takes up a whole entire wall. If you look at the landscape, it's very ornamental. It's oil and canvas, very, very Rococo. And when I say very, very Rococo, it's because Rococo is very light, very elegant. Lots of use of curving natural forms, lots of ornamentation. Pastels, ivory white, and gold were the dominant colors. Now, having described Rococo, I invite you to start seeing the painting to see if it does fit the description. And if you look closely, you see the figures are at once very delicate and very lush at the same time. Their clothes are sumptuous silks, their skin very soft and very supple. I'd like to know what kind of lotion they're using, actually. And their cheeks are very ruddy with health. The whole scene is a beautiful dream of the verdant foliage and the babbling brook creating a luxuriant moment in time. The young lady just looking out of the frame, very happy, very content, in the company of her young man. The young man himself is in the act of putting flowers in her hair, but his attention is captured by a second lady walking into the scene, her baskets of flowers indicating that she may be a flower vendor. We have two stone amorini or stone cherubs that survey the unfolding narrative. And we have the young man's dog by his feet waiting on his master. Interestingly enough, when a painter puts dogs in a painting, it actually denotes fidelity or the lack thereof. And from there, I will leave you to your conclusions right then. So again, we see the whole painting, the whole tableau of lovers in the park. Who are the lovers? Actually, we don't know. It's really up to the viewer. Now, the artist behind this painting is Francois Boucher. He was an accomplished painter, draughtsman, and etcher, and he popularized Rococo with the help of his patroness, Madame de Pompadour. Why is the name important? Madame de Pompadour was the mistress of King Louis XV, not the 16th. The 16th is the husband to Marie Antoinette. So King Louis XV is the father, and I guess the father-in-law to Marie Antoinette. But for all intents and purposes, this is King Louis XV, and Madame de Pompadour was his mistress and wielded considerable power in the French court. And Francois Boucher actually has several well-known portraits of the Madame, and he was born in Paris. His father was also a painter, a very celebrated artist of the 18th century. He won the Prix de Rome in 1720, which is a very, very prestigious prize that helped him go to Italy to study more art. He was admitted in the Royal Academy for painting and sculpture, and he had a very extremely successful career, partly because of his talent and partly because of his patroness, the Madame de Pompadour. And then by the time the Lovers in the Park was painted, Rococo was actually on the decline because its highly stylized and pleasing style was seen as ultimately uninspiring and unedifying. But we can talk about that in another tour. So Francois Boucher died in Paris on May 30th, 1770, by all accounts, a successful artist, unlike Rembrandt. Well, Rembrandt was successful too, but let's leave it at that. And so we come to our last painting of the tour. So right now we're at the French Gallery. And from the French Gallery, we're going to head over into the American Gallery. And the last painting that I would like to talk about was created by the first internationally known American artist, Benjamin West. This painting is called Fidelia and Speranza. It was painted in 1776. Again, it's oil and canvas, non-religious subject matter, as this is based on characters from Sir Edmund Spenser's epic poem, The Fairy Queen. And when I say epic, I mean epic. It was originally meant to be 12 books, but I believe only 5 or 6 came out. For our painting, the characters in there are Fidelia over here and Speranza over here. So Fidelia means faith, Speranza means hope, and they're full length and they stand in an interior setting probably a waiting room in the House of Holiness. Fidelia is carrying a book of the New Testament and a chalice of St. John. The snake coming out of the chalice represents poison that has been removed and the drink purified. Speranza on her end is carrying an anchor. In the background, we see two more characters over here, if you can see them. And these characters are actually the Red Cross Knight and possibly his lady love, Una. And this whole story is about the Red Cross Knight who is on his quest, and Una just rescued him, and they're seeking refuge in the House of Holiness. So once the Red Cross Knight arrives, Fidelia will reaffirm his faith with the New Testament and have him drink from the cup, while Esperanza will anchor him to his faith. Of course, the Red Cross Knight eventually completes his quest of the virtue of holiness, and all is well. And that's just book one. So there's a couple more books if you're ever interested in reading it, but again, it's a pretty epic poem. Now, Fidelia and Esperanza were painted in the neoclassical style, which is a movement that drew inspiration from the art and culture of classic antiquity. For our intents and purposes today, the difference between neoclassicism and Renaissance is that Renaissance wanted to achieve perfection in the human body or the human form and in the architectural form, whereas neoclassicism sought to imitate or at least emulate forms of classic antiquity, which are Roman figures and Greek figures. Now, Benjamin West, of the artist who created Fidelia and Esperanza, was entirely self-taught, and he was the first American to put the United States on the map, or to put the United States on the cultural map. Before him, the world just assumed that Americans were not cultured enough because we lived in the colonies and we were, I guess, struggling and building and trying to create a better world. And Benjamin West helped give the cultured world a better version of the American colonists. He was able to tour Europe with the generosity of patrons, and he learned classical techniques through copying and drawing existing Roman art that he saw on his way. He visited England in 1763 and actually ended up living up there the rest of his life. He apparently won over King George III, was sometimes called the American Raphael, and he helped found the Royal Academy in London. His success also inspired other younger Americans to pursue art as a career versus other jobs at that time. And so I now end the tour with a hope that you did see that these art pieces as representations and productions of their time, that you were also able to see how human creativity has progressed over the ages, and hopefully get you just a bit more interested in art.
Thank you so much, Lucia. We can give her a virtual round of applause. Great job. That was a very interesting tour. I want to turn it now to some questions. If anyone has questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. If you don't want to unmute yourself, you can also place your question in the chat and I can read it for you. So you can go ahead and do that now. And I'll check Facebook as well. Oh, we did have a comment from Facebook that John Velasco, who's on our visitor and experience team, was watching and said that he was so happy to see this and so happy to see you, Lucia. So you have a fan watching on Facebook.
Hey.
But I have a question that I can get us started with.
Sure.
I think it was really interesting how you were talking more about the materials used. So there's types of paint, which is something that I kind of always forget about. You know, I'm not an artist myself, so I don't often think about that. But you come from an art background, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, like, why do artists pick, you know, egg tempera versus oil? Is it just like that's what's available to them, or is there actually a stylistic kind of choice?
So artists back then picked materials out of necessity. I'm more of necessity as opposed to cost, I guess. But let's focus on the word necessity. It was basically what was available to them at that time. And so, and because they didn't know any better as well. So they knew that egg tempera was a great base and could hold onto color very well, and and it painted very well on wooden panels. And so that's what they used. Part of why the Renaissance was so evolutionary was that they discovered that oil was a better medium with paint than egg, and it had the added factor of drying very slowly. Because the reason for egg tempera plus painting on wood was that once you painted on it, that was it. You couldn't change it. Like, it was there forever, for perpetuity. The beautiful thing about oil was that you could paint on canvas and it dried very slowly. So as an artist, if you're kind of like Rembrandt, who changed his mind a lot, if you wanted to change the subject of what you were painting, you could start all over again. And that was the appeal of oil on canvas. And canvas itself was actually easier to paint on, not just because of the fact that the cloth was easier to come by, because of course for wooden panels, you had to cut down a tree, you had to smooth it out, you had to make sure it was dry. So lots of factors go into getting a wooden panel. Whereas for a canvas, you could just prep it and stretch it out, and that was it. And it didn't even need to be colored. It could just be any sort of color, because you're going to paint on it anyway. And so that's why the Renaissance was so evolutionary, in that oil and canvas became one of the more common types of painting. I believe nowadays we use acrylic, which is an even more advanced version of oil. But yes, so again, it was out of necessity, and also because people just didn't know what else to do. But thank goodness for artists who always experiment, who try out new things, and that's why we get to where we are today.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I had never really thought about that you can kind of change it when you're using oil. So it's almost like if you're using a pencil and you can erase it. It's kind of a similar idea where you can change it, if you change your mind or want to paint over something.
Exactly. Our Rembrandt, actually, when they did an X-ray of it, there was actually a figure of a woman underneath our Rembrandt. Oh. So apparently Rembrandt started painting a figure of a woman, and then changed his mind halfway, erased it all, and we have San Bartolomeo. So,
oh no. Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. Wow. I know. Imagine what it could have been like if he hadn't chosen to do that, if he had stuck with his original design.
Yep.
Huh. Well, are there any other questions from our audience? We have a lot of comments in the chat, nice things people are saying. Thank you. Oh, someone asked, did they ever buy paintings that proved to be forgeries? Well, I don't know.
Yes. I'm going to use Rembrandt again as an example. There was actually a institution, I forget what it's called, Rembrandt Institution, Rembrandt Searching. It was an institution that was established back in the 70s or 80s for the precise function of determining if Rembrandts were forgeries or not. So the number of genuine Rembrandts goes up and down in a year. And the reason why they're forgeries is because all of these big artists had workshops, and they would teach their techniques to their students. And sometimes their students would kind of put their master's name on there so you could sell better. So there's definitely a lot of that going around. So, and it's always better if you want to authenticate your painting. I do highly recommend that because of these forgeries. Not to say though, there was a lot of very beautiful forgeries. And if the artist was just brave enough to put their own name on there, maybe you would have an actual piece by the actual artist. So
yeah, because it wasn't like it maybe was necessarily made in modern times. It was still made back then, but it wasn't made by Rembrandt. It was made by one of his students.
They just wanted to sell.
Yeah, that makes
sense. They needed to eat. I don't know.
Yeah, you got to connect it to the big name. And so, someone was also asking, I guess, more about Amy and Ann Putnam. Like, how did they acquire these pieces? Do you know anything about like where they would have gone to get these, or how did they pick? How do you pick an extraordinary painting that you want?
So Anne and Amy had an army of art consultants. Well, not an army, but they definitely had art consultants at their disposal. They actually paid several of them. They had connections. They visited New York, Chicago, London, Paris. They were actually very reclusive too. There's a whole other story I can tell you about how reclusive they were. But again, they were very wealthy ladies who loved art. And so they had this army of people, of consultants who would send them books, send them letters, telling them about pieces, and then they would look at collections and determine what to buy. So, and I like to think that they do have a refined sense of taste because of our collection today. But but yeah, the great thing about money is that it can get you all sorts of resources. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they were very wealthy, and so like you said, they weren't limited to, you know, maybe just what was going on in California. They could send their army, as you put it, out all to the world and the greatest art centers. Yeah. So our last question that I think we have time for is, which is your favorite painting? We had a question from Vanessa asking.
Oh, my favorite painting is actually, it's not in the tour. It's still a significant piece, but it's not in the tour. It's actually a love letter by Nicholas Mays. And it's actually one of the smaller paintings, it's about this big. And it's because I'm a romantic at heart, and it was also the favorite piece of my late husband. But it's basically this man, in the picture, it's a man delivering a love letter to a woman. And that woman is actually the artist's wife. And she's basically depicting their courtship. So that was my favorite piece, but it's unfortunately not on the tour.
Yeah,
maybe if I do a tour in the future, I can.
It's in the Dutch Flemish Gallery, is that right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, next time we open, you know, people can go back and see the Metsu, I think it is. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for.
Sorry, it was Gabriel Metsu. Never mind. Oh, there goes. For our favorite piece, I forgot the artist, right? Anyway.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, well, thank you all for attending.
Yes, thank you so much.
Here, and we had a great audience. We had over like 35 people. So, and maybe more on Facebook. So thanks so much. I did want to mention before we go that we have an upcoming event. Speaking of love stories, speaking of love letters, we have an upcoming event, a Valentine's Day themed workshop where you will learn from one of our artists in residence from 2018, Bhavna Mehta, who was exhibited here in 2018. She'll be doing a virtual workshop where you can make your own bouquet card, Valentine's Day card, and it's all about paper manipulation and cutting these really complex shapes out of paper to make them look really beautiful. But Bhavna is going to bring it down to, you know, a beginner's level. So if you're not an artist, you can still join the class and still make a beautiful card. So all the information for that is on our website. If you go to timkenmuseum.org and then you click on the events tab, you'll see it there. And then we also have a Facebook page, Facebook event for it. So if you're on Facebook, you can just go to the event tab on Facebook and you'll find it. And really important, there are only 3 spots left. We only have 3 spots left, and it is on February 11th. So it's a week from today. So sign up as soon as you can, because those spots will go quick. And then we will mail all of the supplies to you. So everything you need, literally everything you need for the craft, we're going to mail to you. So make sure to sign up as soon as you can to reserve your spot, and also to make sure that the supplies get to you in time. But yes, as I said, all the information is on our website and our Facebook page. So thank you again, Lucia, and we'll see you all here next week at the same time, 11 a.m. for another tour of our collection.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.